He did not see the sword. He had been bowing to that emperor for 30 years. September of 454. The patrician Flavius Aetius walks into the imperial palace at Ravenna, carrying a tax roll for the western provinces. He has come alone. He looks up from the parchment half a second too late. Valentinian III, the boy he has propped up since the boy was 6, is already on his feet. The chamberlain is closing the door behind them both. Rewind half a century. Aetius is born around 391 in Durostorum on the Danube, the son of a Roman cavalry general named Gaudentius and an Italian noblewoman whose name does not survive in any chronicle. At 13, he is sent abroad as an imperial hostage, first to the Visigoth Alaric, and then for a much longer stretch to the Huns, through the kingships that followed Uldin and into the reign of Rugila. By the time he is old enough to shave, he has slept more nights in a wagon than in a Roman house. He learns the Hunnic recurve bow, the way other Roman boys learn the toga. Gregory of Tours, drawing on a now lost contemporary historian named Frigeridas, says that he wearied no enemy in battle and despised want. Among the Hunnic princes is a slighter boy, a few years younger. The boy's name is Attila. 25 years pass. The empress mother Galla Placidia rules from Ravenna for her child emperor Valentinian III, and she has chosen Aetius's rival Bonifacius. The African comes who held Africa against the Vandals after his break with them, to outrank him as patrician of the West. Aetius marches on Rimini in 432 and loses the battle on the field. Bonifacius wins it, but somewhere in the cavalry shock he takes a wound. By some accounts the spear was Aetius's. He is dead of it within months. Aetius rides east before any messenger can catch him, all the way back to Rugila, the Hunnic king who had raised him, and he comes back to Italy with an army of horse archers Galla Placidia cannot answer. The empress, who has just buried his rival, signs the documents that make him patrician. Marcellinus Comes, an Eastern Latin chronicler writing 2 generations later, will say flatly that Aetius caused the death of Bonifacius. Prosper of Aquitaine, who is contemporary, will only say he benefited from it. Either way, the parchment is signed. The boy from the steppe tents has become indispensable to people who do not love him. For 2 decades after Rimini, Aetius is Rome in the West. Sidonius Apollinaris will write a few years later that he is the only bulwark of Gaul. Valentinian, now grown but not grown into the role, signs whatever the patrician sets in front of him. Aetius leases Hunnic cavalry to break the Burgundian kingdom on the Rhine in 437. He leases them again to ride down the Bagaudae in Aquitania. He sends letters in elegant senatorial Latin to Constantinople in the morning and shouts orders in fluent Hunnic across his own horse line in the afternoon. He is the rarest thing the late Western Empire produces. He is a man at home in 2 camps. The cost of that gift is hidden inside his own house and has not yet been priced. A wife from a Visigothic noble line, a son named Gaudentius, books in 3 languages on the campaign chest. The boy who learned the recurve bow before the toga has not yet been asked to choose between the people who taught him each. A single image. A leather satchel on a folding camp stool. Inside, a wax tablet with the Senate's resolution, a horsehair amulet from the steppes, an ivory diptych of his son Gaudentius. The hands that pack it for travel are the same hands. Spring of 451. Attila, now sole king of the Huns after killing his brother Bleda, crosses the Rhine with a coalition no one in living memory has ever assembled. Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, Rugi, Skiri, Heruli, Thuringians. The pretext for the invasion is grotesque and almost theatrical. Justa Grata Honoria, Valentinian's sister, has been confined to the palace for an affair with her household steward, and she has done what any clever Roman princess would do. She has sent a letter and her ring to the most dangerous man on the continent. Attila has chosen to read this as a marriage proposal. He demands Honoria as bride and half the Western Empire as her dowry. Metz falls on Easter morning. Reims, Trier. The man who grew up among the Huns is sending couriers riding day and night to Toulouse, to Bordeaux, to the Frankish forests, calling in every barbarian king who owes him anything. Priscus of Panium, who has actually stood inside Attila's tent on a Roman embassy, says the Hunnic king did not believe that Aetius could pull a coalition together in time. Aetius pulls a coalition together in time. The boy from the steppe tents is calling the children of those same tents to war. Catalaunian Eve. A man alone with a horse, his hand raised. He says nothing. He puts his palm on the animal's neck. He does not look toward the Hunnic camp. 20th of June, 451. A sloping ridge in Champagne. Jordanes, writing a century later from a now-lost Cassiodorian source, will set down a casualty figure of 165,000 dead, and modern scholars will universally reject it as the rhetoric of a man counting in the wrong direction. What is real is this. Two coalition armies of the late antique world, totaling tens of thousands of men on each side, collide on a low rise above a stream. King Theodoric of the Visigoths is killed in the first hour. The king is unhorsed in his own front line and trampled by his own cavalry. His son Thorismund holds the right wing on grief. Sangiban's Alans waver in the center, exactly where Aetius has placed them, knowing they will. Aetius and his Roman regulars hold the left. By dusk, the Hunnic charge has broken on the slope, and Attila has fallen back into his wagon laager. Jordanes claims he orders a pyre of saddles built so that no man of Rome will ever take him alive. Whether that detail is true or borrowed from an older heroic poem, the strategic shape of the battle is clear in every chronicle. Attila has lost the field. Night closes. There is no quiet in any tongue. Roman buccinas, Visigothic war horns, the keening of the dying that needs no translation. Somewhere out there in the grass, the man who taught Aetius to ride a horse and the man who taught Attila to draw a bow are perhaps the same man, dead under different banners. Aetius walks the Roman lines without speaking. He looks at the wagon laager where Attila is. He does not give the order to assault. First light. Attila is still in his wagon laager. He could be finished where he stands. Aetius rides instead to Thorismund, the new Visigothic king kneeling in his father's blood, and he tells him plainly what the sources will paraphrase in Latin and Greek and 4 kinds of Frankish. Go home, secure your throne, your brothers will take it if you do not." Thorismund goes. Attila is allowed to withdraw across the Rhine with what remains of his coalition. Was it strategy, the calculation that a Visigothic kingdom too strong without a Hunnic counterweight is a worse problem than a beaten Hun? Or was it the boy from the tents, refusing the last spear cast at the man who once taught him to ride? His own staff, who would have heard whatever order he gave that morning, commit nothing to parchment. The patrician himself never explains. 2 summers pass after Catalaunian. The Hunnic frontier is quiet. The Senate at Rome calls Aetius Patricius, and the man who turned away the unspeakable. The western provinces start to forget what unspeakable looked like. Then, 453, Attila takes a new bride, a young woman named Ildiko, and drinks heavily at the wedding feast. In the morning, his attendants find him dead on the bed, drowned in his own nosebleed. The Hunnic Confederacy starts breaking apart inside 2 summers. The brothers fight for the inheritance and lose. The thing that made Aetius indispensable to a frightened Western Empire, his unique grip on the Hunnic frontier, has stopped existing the moment Attila stops breathing. The patrician does not yet realize that he, too, has stopped being indispensable. He is the only man in Italy who has not yet realized it. Sidonius Apollinaris, the Gallo-Roman aristocrat who will later eulogize him, is already noting that the Senate at Rome has begun to talk about Aetius the way one talks about a creditor. Late summer of 454, Aetius proposes a betrothal between his son Gaudentius and the emperor's daughter Placidia. On parchment, it is a routine dynastic gesture. In the air, it is something else, because it would put a half-Aetius heir on the throne of the West, and the senator Petronius Maximus, who had wanted that marriage for his own son, takes it personally. The chamberlain Heraclius, eunuch, palace creature, lifelong jealous of the patrician, takes it as opportunity. They begin to whisper to the emperor through the dinners and the hunts and the quiet between dispatches. They suggest that Aetius is impatient. They suggest that Aetius is ambitious. They whisper, most carefully and most often, that Aetius is dangerous. Valentinian, who has signed the patrician's documents for 30 years and has never read most of them, finds that this time he is listening. John of Antioch, working from now lost sources 2 centuries later, names Heraclius as the daily poisoner of the emperor's mind. Sidonius blames Petronius Maximus. Both men profit from the murder. Both men should be named. 21st or 22nd of September, 454. The patrician arrives at the palace at Ravenna with a financial report. He carries no weapon. He has been in this room 1,000 times. He bows to the emperor he has propped up since the boy was 6. He begins reading the tax figures from the western provinces. Valentinian III, who has been coached by Heraclius through 5 sleepless nights, rises from the throne with a sword that has not been drawn in 30 years of reign. The patrician looks up. There is half a second, only a half a second, when his face is the face of a man who cannot fit what is happening into the world he understands. He has misread the emperor for the first and last time in his life. The blade lands. Heraclius pulls a dagger from inside his sleeve and finishes what the boy began. Aetius goes down on one knee on the marble. he looks at Valentinian. He says nothing the sources record. Some sources, all of them Greek, all of them later, claim that an unnamed courtier said something afterwards, that Valentinian had used his left hand to cut off his right. The exact wording in the Greek paraphrase is disputed in every scholarly edition, and that disputed shape is more honest to what happened than any verbatim could be. The empire that has just put down its last competent commander will not survive 22 more years. The patrician dies on the floor of the room. The man who broke Attila is broken by the boy he raised. A face carved in marble, somewhere on a sarcophagus that does not belong to him. The eyes look right. The mouth has the line a soldier's mouth has when it has been told too much, too late. The Greek phrase will be paraphrased 100 times in 100 languages. I have read it in 3 different scholarly editions, and not one of them is his. 16th of March, 455, Campus Martius, outside Rome. Valentinian III is reviewing troops on horseback, the first thing he has ever done that resembles command in his own person. 2 of Aetius's old bodyguards, the Scythians Attila and Thraustila, ride up through the parade rank as if delivering a routine report. Attila strikes the emperor on the temple. As Valentinian falls from the saddle, Thraustila finishes him. Heraclius is cut down beside the emperor's body. No one in the imperial guard moves. Not one sword is drawn. The 2 Scythians turn their horses around and ride out of the parade ground at the same trot they came in on, and no Roman officer alive has the standing to stop them. 6 months. 6 months between the murder of the patrician and the murder of his murderer. The empire that has just watched its own emperor killed in front of it does not arrest the killers. It does not chase them. The chronicles record this in a single line each, as if it were the weather, and that may be the most accurate thing the chronicles ever do. Petronius Maximus takes the purple for 77 days. He is then torn apart by a Roman mob on his way out of the city. 3 months after the mob is finished with him, the Vandal sails of Gaiseric are inside the Tiber, and Gaiseric's men are sacking Rome itself. Procopius, writing in Constantinople nearly 100 years later, will set down the line that with Aetius, the safety of the West also died. The exact words are a paraphrase that has wandered between Greek and Latin and English. Every late Roman who outlived Catalaunian, and every late Roman who outlived the murder, would have signed it. 21 years after the patrician dies on the floor of a palace in Ravenna, a German officer sets aside the last child emperor, and the West simply stops being an empire. The man who could have stopped it had been killed by the man whose throne he was holding up. The boy from the steppe tents is not on the coinage. He is not a saint in the chronicle margins. He is, by the choice of the emperor he served, not even allowed to be the cause of his own avenged death. He is the shape of a missing weight in the Western record. So the question is the one the chronicles never ask. Of the men in the room that September afternoon in 454, which one had the steadier hand, and what did the empire owe to whichever of them it chose to lose?